A dark circle burns on the ground as the ritual begins. A camcorder captures the grainy, terrifying dance of a pale, spectral figure. Distorted tapes reveal flickers of a face decaying in the cold blue light. The camera zooms in on a single, wide, unblinking eye staring back. Piper stands on a sidewalk, unaware of the chaos brewing in her future. She talks to friends, her movements fluid while her eyes remain milky white. A quick cut shows the girls whispering, their faces tight with unspoken secrets. Piper's expression shifts, a flicker of something ancient hiding behind her blindness. Andy walks alongside her, his hood pulled low against the biting wind. The siblings move together, a singular unit against the encroaching gray fog. Laura opens a kitchen drawer, her fingers trembling as she hunts for something. A door swings open, revealing a bathroom where shadows dance on tiles. A body lies limp on the floor, surrounded by a pool of crimson. The camera pans across the tiled room, capturing every gruesome, wet detail. Andy steps into the frame, his face pale, eyes wide with raw terror. He scans the room, searching for a sign, a reason for this nightmare. Fear grips him, turning his casual posture into a statue of pure dread. He looks toward the doorway, his breathing ragged, shallow, and fast. A counselor's office appears, filled with soft light and comforting pastel drawings. Laura smiles behind her desk, her expression too bright, too perfectly practiced. The conversation feels heavy, loaded with a tension that threatens to snap. She leans in, her words sharp, cutting through the thin air between them. The girl huddles beneath a bed frame, her eyes darting into the dark corners. Two men in neon shirts lift a heavy carpet, revealing hidden floorboards. Piper and Andy lie side by side, their faces inches apart in the quiet. They share a look of profound, silent exhaustion that transcends simple words. Their hands brush, a desperate tether in a world turning upside down. Inside a car, the siblings sit in silence, staring out at passing trees. Piper rests her head, her eyes closed, seemingly lost in a dream. Andy looks at her, a protective instinct warring with his mounting panic. The blue sedan pulls into a driveway, crunching over dry, brown leaves. A strange, geometric house looms ahead, isolated by a thick, dark forest. They stand at the threshold, the metal gate rattling against the wind. An embrace happens in the doorway, a hollow gesture of forced welcome. Laura watches them, her presence filling the hallway with a suffocating weight. She gestures for them to enter, her hand lingering on the frame. Andy follows, his movements tentative, like someone walking toward a sudden trap. A small dog stares into the void, its fur ruffled by drafts. Piper reaches out to touch the wall, feeling for a hidden switch. Laura watches her, the shadows accentuating the harsh lines on her face. The boy stands still, his eyes fixed on something only he sees. He stares at the wall, a blank slate for his inner torment. Laura keeps watching, never breaking the rhythm of her calculated, slow vigil. A phone pressed to her ear, she whispers words that sound like. Andy wanders into the backyard, his eyes scanning the neglected murky pool. The structure looks like a tomb, waiting for something to be buried. He paces the perimeter, his footsteps silent on the damp, cold moss. Laura emerges with the child, pulling him close in a stifling hug. The boy's arms hang loose, unresponsive, his skin marked with jagged bruises. She marks a line on the wall, measuring him like a specimen. The height difference is noted, a tally mark in a dark ritual. She pushes him forward, her touch firm, devoid of any real affection. The siblings wait, their presence a quiet intrusion into her private work. Piper senses the change in the air, her head turning slowly around. Laura offers a thin, tight smile, her eyes darting away in anxiety. A thin, white chalk line sits on the gravel, a boundary marked. Andy enters the room, his eyes scanning for secrets in the clutter. The interior feels oppressive, the air thick with the smell of mold. He sits on the edge of the bed, his posture slumped forward. Laura watches him from the shadows, her figure barely visible against wall. She begins to pace, her movements erratic like a bird in cage. Every turn is deliberate, tracing invisible shapes on the worn carpet floor. Andy watches, his eyes tracking her rhythm, his mind beginning to fray. She stops, her gaze locking onto his with a sudden, sharp intensity. The silence screams, filled only by the sound of her frantic breaths. He averts his eyes, feeling the weight of her stare on him. A weight set clatters to the floor in a dark, cluttered garage. A hand reaches for a tool, fingers curled into a tight grip. The bedroom is bathed in a deep, unsettling hue of blood red. Piper lies on the bed, her breathing steady, lost in deep sleep. The shadows shift in the corners, creeping toward the sleeping, vulnerable girl. A door stands slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting the darkness. A VHS player hums in the corner, a relic of a past. Distorted images crawl across the television screen, jagged and deeply disturbing scenes. The flickering blue light casts long, dancing shadows across the cramped room. Andy sits in the dark, watching the screen with hollow, weary eyes. He is paralyzed, the images on the tape locking him in place. The house breathes around him, an entity waiting for the final act. Laura kneels by the pool edge, painting a symbol on the stone. The reflection in the water shows her face, gaunt and utterly consumed. She sits on the ledge, staring into the dark, stagnant, deep water. Andy curls on a mattress, his body language signaling a deep defeat. He turns to the side, his face hidden in the coarse fabric. Looking toward the bathroom, he sees the light casting a sickly glow. Piper sleeps in the dark, her chest rising with slow, rhythmic ease. Her eyelids flutter, a momentary break in the stillness of her slumber. A silhouette stands in the doorway, watching the children in the dark. They stand together, unified by grief in the middle of a church. People move around them in a blur, their faces masks of condolences. Laura approaches, her presence a jarring note in the solemn, quiet air. She leans over the casket, her actions precise and strangely cold here. Andy looks on, his expression a mix of confusion and building resentment. She whispers something, her head tilted, the shadows hiding her true intent. A tension crackles in the air as they stand in the light. The cat slinks through the hallway, its eyes glowing in the dark. It pauses, sensing the predator moving through the quiet, wooden-framed house. The boy stands at the door, his hands stained a bright crimson. He grips the wire mesh, his knuckles white and bleeding from wounds. The man in the casket looks peaceful, a stark contrast to reality. His suit is sharp, the tie knotted with an almost military precision. Laura moves with a purpose, her words weaving a web of lies. Andy listens, his jaw set, refusing to give in to her influence. He looks down at his hands, finding blood on his own skin. A sudden, sharp movement brings the scene to a grinding, violent halt. She reaches out, a gesture of comfort that feels like a threat. The car moves through the streets, the windows trapping the dense silence. Piper stares forward, her expression unreadable, eyes clouded by her eternal night. Laura drives with an intensity that borders on the edge of mania. The boy stands in the dark room, a shadow among the furniture. Andy pours a drink, the glass clinking against the wooden bar surface. He stares into the amber liquid, his reflection dancing in the glass. The light flickers, threatening to plunge the entire house into deep darkness. Laura drinks, her movements jerky, reflecting the instability within her own mind. She tilts her head back, the glass catching the light one last. A sharp, sudden laugh echoes through the kitchen, chilling and totally empty. They stand in the dining room, the shadows carving lines on faces. Laura spins around, her energy frantic, buzzing like a live, exposed wire. Piper stands in the background, a ghost waiting for the signal here. They are trapped, their movements dictated by an unseen, ancient, cruel hand. The boy plays with a glowing stick, the neon light hypnotic here. He lies back, the glow illuminating his face in a green haze. Andy watches, his expression softening as he observes the child's strange game. Laura watches them, her presence a constant, suffocating, ever-present, watchful shadow. The room is quiet, the air thick with tension and unspoken guilt. He stares at the floor, his thoughts a labyrinth he cannot navigate. The woman stands at the periphery, her silhouette merging with the wall. She observes him, her eyes tracing his every move with clinical precision. The silence stretches, unbroken, until the walls seem to press inward here. Every breath is labored, a struggle against the weight of the house. Andy looks up, his eyes meeting hers in a silent, violent clash. She holds his gaze, a mask of calm covering her inner frenzy. The light changes, shifting into a warm, inviting yet deceptive, soft glow. He stands, his movements stiff, as if his joints are made stone. A lock turns, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. Laura watches him walk away, her smile widening into a predatory grin. The hallway is a tunnel, dark and stretching toward an unknown end. He reaches the end, a door waiting for his final, desperate decision. Shadows dance on the ceiling, shapes forming and unforming in the dark. She whispers to the empty room, her voice a fragile, brittle thing. The house seems to hold its breath, waiting for the coming storm. He steps out, the night air hitting his face like a blow. The darkness is absolute, a curtain drawn over the dying, cold earth. She follows, her footsteps soft, predatory, a hunter in the deep night. The pool waits, a dark, rectangular abyss reflecting only the dim light. A figure stands by the edge, a ghost of a lost memory. She pours liquid, the silver canister catching the moon's pale, cold light. The water ripples, a disturbance in the stillness of the dark surface. A face emerges from the deep, eyes white, reflecting the pale sky. Laura gazes at it, her expression one of utter, religious, frantic awe. The boy sits in the water, his skin translucent, a fragile vessel. He looks at his hands, shaking, the skin raw and deeply inflamed. She touches his face, her fingers tracing the path of his pain. The air is still, the world frozen in a moment of ritual. She pulls back, her expression shifting, the mask finally beginning to slip. Andy finds the shirt, a discarded memory of a life before this. He pulls it over his head, the fabric smelling of stale air. Laura stands in the doorway, her presence filling the room with dread. They stare at each other, a silent war waged in the dark. He moves past her, his heart hammering against his ribs like drums. She turns to watch him, her eyes tracking his movement with hunger. The door clicks shut, the sound final sealing them in the house. The pool reflects the sky, a deep indigo void in the night. He douses his head, the water running cold down his tight skin. The faucet drips, a slow, metronomic beat in the quiet of night. He gasps for air, the cold shock forcing him to wake up. The girl sits in the dark, her eyes wide, staring at nothing. She feels the wall, her fingers tracing the patterns of the grain. Andy opens the door, his eyes adjusting to the low, dim light. He sees the table, the remains of a meal abandoned in haste. The boy sits there, his posture slumped, waiting for a silent sign. He stares at the empty plate, the porcelain white and cold here. He takes a bite of the raw, gray, unknown food-like substance now. The knife in his hand glints, a silver flash in the dark. He chews, his jaw moving with a rhythmic, mechanical, and slow pace. Andy watches, the scene etched into his mind like a hot brand. The boy looks up, his eyes meeting Andy's with a dead stare. He drops the fork, the metal clattering against the hardwood floor. Andy turns, his stomach churning, his body rejecting the truth of it. He grabs the scrap of paper, the ink running with fresh blood. The words are scrawled, a frantic message from the other side here. The tape glitches, the image fracturing into a sea of static snow. Laura enters, her shadow stretching across the floor to touch his feet. She stands over the sleeping boy, her shadow a dark, heavy shroud. She touches his head, a gesture both motherly and deeply, truly sinister. The video loops, a repeating nightmare played on an endless, broken cycle. She grips his chin, forcing his head back to expose his throat. Her fingers are long, trembling, a desperate, clawing, frantic, searching touch. They stand locked in a silent, suffocating, tense, staring standoff here. He backs away, the space between them widening into a grand chasm. The shadow follows, a silent presence that refuses to leave the room. A cane taps against the gravel path, marking the slow, steady approach. The water in the shower falls, a curtain of static white noise. The circular mirror catches the spray, refracting the light into a mist. He stands under the flow, his shoulders hunched against the freezing pressure. The steam rises, wrapping him in a soft, thick, suffocating, warm embrace. The glass fogs, turning the world outside into a blur of gray. He touches the surface, a palm print forming on the wet glass. A face appears, eyes milky and sightless, staring through the fog veil. He screams, the sound lost beneath the rush of the cascading water. Medical monitors pulse in the dim blue light around an unconscious Andy. Sudden cuts reveal glitching static and distorted, grainy VHS footage of an occult ritual. Behind the bars of a hospital crib, Andy struggles while connected to heavy tubes. That's when the camera pans to a rain-streaked window overlooking a dark, turbulent pool. Out of nowhere, a silhouette stands motionless against the deep blue water of the pool. Laura, face pale and haunted, stares into the middle distance with a hollow expression. A trembling, skeletal hand reaches out to grasp Piper's fingers in the suffocating dark. Laura points an accusatory finger toward the screen, her eyes wide with unhinged, manic intent. Piper, blind and vulnerable, flinches as Laura's presence looms over her like a shadow. The television screen flickers, showing a young girl in a leopard print mask swimming underwater. Kathy surfaces in the pool, her mask eerie and contrasting with the clinical blue light. Laura's face contorts in raw grief, tears streaming as she watches the flickering screen. Andy lies pale on a hospital bed, his eyes glassy and unseeing in pain. Laura hovers over Andy's bedside, her voice hushed and urgent in the quiet ward. Twitching, Andy gasps for air as the medical equipment beeps with a steady rhythm. That's when Laura leans closer, whispering something cryptic directly into his traumatized, sweating ear. The boy continues to convulse, his face a mask of terror under the fluorescent glare. Suddenly, the scene shifts to a muddy, rain-drenched exterior where Laura grabs at Piper. Their struggle intensifies in the downpour, bodies colliding against the cold, unyielding backyard ground. Piper cries out, her hands flailing as she desperately tries to escape Laura's grip. Out of nowhere, Piper's hand brushes the tiled edge of the dark, stagnant pool. Laura raises her arms to the gray, weeping sky as if calling for something. The girl smiles, revealing missing teeth, her blind eyes fixed on the empty air. Spinning in her floral dress, she looks like a ghost in the overgrown garden. She twirls again, holding a bouquet of dead, withered flowers against the mossy wall. Suddenly, they embrace in a dark room, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Laura cups the girl's face, her thumb tracing the line of a jaw in silence. A quiet, intense conversation passes between them, the air heavy with long-held, dark secrets. She pulls the girl into a tight, desperate hold that feels more like containment. Piper is held firmly, her expression unreadable as the world around them remains muted. They stand face to face, the silence punctuated only by the sound of rain. Laura's eyes search the girl's face, hunting for a sign of recognition or life. That's when a hand gently touches the side of her face, caressing the skin. The intimacy is chilling, framed by the darkness of their shared, claustrophobic living space. Rubbing her hands together, Laura prepares for the ritual, her movements precise and practiced. She whispers to the air, her face twisted in a mixture of hope and madness. Kathy's face breaks the surface of the tub, her eyes wide and hauntingly still. Deep, dark water ripples as the camera dips below the surface into total silence. Andy sits in the passenger seat of a car, his eyes reflecting neon city lights. Rain streaks the glass, distorting the world into a blur of cold, blue colors. He stares ahead, his posture stiff, listening to the muffled sounds of the night. Girl lies asleep in a bed, bathed in the soft, eerie red glow. Suddenly, Andy reaches out, his hand trembling as he checks if she is breathing. He holds a small, green object, turning it over in his calloused, shaking hands. The girl wakes, her movements sluggish, as if emerging from a long, troubled dream. The screen plays a low-fidelity video of a body being prepared for a burial. Distorted colors and lines wash over Laura's face as she watches the screen's light. The VHS recording shows a ritualistic act of consuming the old, rotting body parts. A face smeared with dark blood stares directly into the camera with dead eyes. Laura watches, mesmerized by the gore flickering on the television in the dark room. A flash of red fills the screen, masking the horrors of the ritualistic feeding. The girl is embraced, the physical contact desperate and bordering on a violent struggle. Sitting on the edge of the tub, Laura waits for the signal to act. She moves with intent, her shadow stretching across the floor as she approaches bed. The girl lies still, oblivious to the figure standing over her in the dark. Laura looms over the sleeping form, her presence heavy and suffocating like a shroud. That's when she sits down, her posture rigid, watching the girl with intense hunger. He lies in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling in the quiet night. Rain drips down the window pane, a rhythmic tapping against the dark, stormy glass. They talk, voices hushed, the tension between the siblings palpable in the small room. Andy leans into the light, his expression etched with a newfound, dangerous sense of resolve. He gestures, trying to explain the impossible horror they are trapped within together now. Laura watches them, her expression unreadable, a silent observer in the dim, stale air. She speaks with a sharp edge, her words cutting through the tension like glass. Andy stands, pacing the room, his agitation rising as he confronts the dark truth. He walks toward the window, looking out at the rain-lashed forest behind the home. Laura follows him with her eyes, her stillness a stark contrast to his movement. She reaches out, placing a hand on his shoulder in a forced, unnatural gesture. The girl looks away, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the dying room. Andy confronts her, his frustration boiling over as he demands the whole truth now. A blue car sits idle in the driveway, drenched by the heavy, unending storm. She grabs his arm, her grip iron tight as she forces him to look away. They stand in the hallway, shadows playing across their faces in the dim light. The wall is covered in missing person posters, their faces fading in the gloom. Outside, a figure walks into the rain, a silhouette against the dark, wet pavement. She opens the car door, the interior light casting a harsh, artificial yellow glow. Andy sits in the office, his frustration mounting as he argues with the woman. He leans forward, face strained, every muscle tight with the weight of the situation. The woman stares at him, her face a mask of cold, bureaucratic, unfeeling concern. Suddenly, the room feels smaller, the walls closing in on them in the dark. Laura grabs a handful of hair, her knuckles white as she pulls them back. She forces his head down, a brutal, sudden movement that silences any further protest. The air in the room is thick with violence and the metallic scent blood. A computer monitor displays a missing person article about the young, lost boy Connor. The woman on the telephone looks distressed, her eyes searching for a wrong answer. Andy sits behind her, watching the screen with a mixture of dread and clarity. A small boy, skin raw and bloodied, crawls along the floor in the dark. His face is a ruin, eyes hollowed out by a hunger that isn't human. He lifts his hand, revealing fingers stained dark with dried, clotted blood and dirt. The boy's mouth works in silent, rhythmic chewing, his teeth clicking in the gloom. Suddenly, he turns his head, a predatory movement toward the sound of the door. Rain drums on the glass, a constant backdrop to the scene of absolute despair. Laura stands covered in blood, her hands shaking as she wipes them on cloth. She looks into the mirror, her own reflection staring back with eyes of madness. Blood runs down the glass, a crimson curtain separating her from the world outside. The reflection shows the boy, his face pressed against the other side of glass. They stand on either side of the pane, separated by the thin, cold barrier. That's when a hand, stained red, presses firmly against the damp, rain-slicked surface again. The words are carved into the wood, a message from the depths of hell. The girl with a blindfold sits in a dark, cold, and echoing room waiting. Andy watches from the car, his phone to his ear in the pouring rain. His hands grip the wheel, knuckles white, as he listens to the urgent voice. The wood of the table is scarred, etched with deep, desperate, and jagged marks. He stares at the phone, his face bathed in the sickly green screen light. Tears well in his eyes as he pleads with the voice on the line. Laura's face emerges from the shadows, her eyes cold, calculating, and completely without mercy. She grabs a cleaning tool, her movements mechanical, sweeping away the shattered glass shards. She works in silence, the broken pieces clattering as they hit the plastic pan. The gym floor is quiet, the ball rolling slowly across the polished hardwood. She washes her hands in the basin, scrubbing the red stains until skin raw. The car sits in the dark driveway, waiting for a passenger who might never. He peers through the window, his breath fogging the glass as he watches her. The woods are black, trees standing like sentinels in the heavy, freezing night rain. A flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, illuminating the wet, rotting leaves below now. They walk into the room, their shadows elongated by the dim, flickering lamplight. The bedroom is dark, the only light coming from the hallway behind them now. They move with a sense of purpose that feels both calculated and deeply insane. Laura watches the girl, her posture protective yet holding a dark, hidden an edge. They walk down the hallway, the floorboards groaning under their slow, deliberate, careful steps. She stops, turning to face her, the intensity of her gaze almost physical touch. They look at each other, a silent understanding passing between them in the dark. Laura leans in, her voice a whisper that barely carries across the small space. She speaks, her lips inches from the girl's ear, the words a cold command. The girl nods, a slow and heavy movement that feels like a surrender now. They embrace, a hug that looks more like a struggle for control than comfort. The woman screams, her voice cracking in the dark, the sound echoing endlessly now. She crawls along the wall, the paint peeling under her frantic, clawing, bloodied fingernails. They run into the night, the rain washing away any tracks they might leave. The body lies in the mud, still and pale under the cold, harsh light. The car drives slowly past the scene, its headlights cutting through the heavy mist. She steps out, her shoes sinking into the mud as she approaches the body. Her hands reach down, fingers brushing the hair of the boy in the mud. She strokes his face, a gesture of tenderness that feels completely misplaced and wrong. Her bloodied hands caress him, the crimson staining his skin even further than before. The rain falls, a steady, rhythmic, and uncaring sound on the dark, wet earth. A side mirror reflects the scene, a small piece of the larger, darker picture. She wanders the gym, lost in a world that she cannot see, only feel. The girl moves through the space, hands out, guided by the sound of rain. She reaches the door, her fingers tracing the frame as she enters the dark. The rain continues to fall, blurring the world into a landscape of gray shades. She looks back, eyes searching for something that she knows isn't there anymore now. A shadow moves in the hallway, a silhouette in the flickering, weak lamplight. She turns, her expression guarded, as if sensing the presence behind her right now. They stand in the room, the silence between them filled with unspoken, dark words. She reaches out, her hand disappearing into the darkness that surrounds the girl now. She pulls her close, the embrace tight, a desperate hold that traps the girl. The girl stands, her face illuminated by the light from the open, dark door. She looks at her, eyes wide, seeing something in the woman's gaze that terrifies. The hand moves, gentle yet firm, guiding her toward the dark, yawning threshold now. She looks toward the light, a flicker of understanding finally breaking through her mask. The darkness swallows them both, a void that seems to consume the very air. She moves, her steps silent on the floor, a ghost in her own home. The girl sits alone, her face a mask of quiet, controlled, and deep despair. The hand touches the surface, a wet, red, and viscous smear of raw blood. It spreads, a dark, pulsing stain on the wood, growing with every heavy heartbeat. She stares at it, her eyes reflecting the darkness of the room's deepest corner. The girl speaks, her voice trembling, a soft, fragile sound in the thick air. She waits for an answer, her patience wearing thin in the crushing, heavy silence. The light shifts, catching the side of her face in a cold, blue gleam. She stands, her figure tall, a looming shadow against the room's single, bright window. The girl turns, her eyes wide, capturing the full scope of the coming horror. They stand in the center of the room, the tension between them snapping tightly. She moves, a blur of motion, her hands reaching out to claim the girl. The girl falls, her body hitting the floor with a dull, heavy, sickening sound. She sits on the floor, the rain pouring against the window, cold and unyielding. The body rests in the water, a silent, still, and hauntingly beautiful, tragic sight. The boy steps into the pool, his movements slow, deliberate, and entirely chillingly wrong. He walks toward the center, his body pale in the murky, deep green light. She holds the girl, her arms wrapped around her as if shielding her from. The water ripples, the surface broken by their slow, deliberate, and final, tragic movements. The girl lies beneath the surface, eyes closed, a ghost caught in the deep. He rises from the water, a monster born of grief and dark, ancient magic. She reaches out, touching the boy's chest, her hands sinking into the wet, cold. They are alone, the pool a sanctuary for the dead and the broken alike. She looks up, her face wet, her eyes searching for a sky she lost. Beneath the water they drift together, a twisted, final, and eternal, silent, dark union. The surface breaks again, a small ripple spreading toward the edge of the pool. She emerges, gasping for air, her face pale in the dim, gray morning light. They hold each other, two ghosts tethered by a bond that defies all nature. The water is still now, the surface a mirror for the dark, empty sky. Everything is silent, the world waiting for a dawn that will never truly break. The cycle is complete, the final, tragic piece clicking into place at the end. She holds the boy, her embrace a final, desperate act of a lost mother. The pool is dark, the only light reflecting off the deep, stagnant, and cold. The trees stand silent, watching the scene from the edge of the dark forest. The flashlight cuts through the woods, a single point of light in the dark. The boy stands, his form small and lonely in the vast, empty, dark night. The girl lies on the bed, her face turned away, lost in the shadows. She cries in the dark, her sobs a soft, rhythmic sound in the silence. The light fades, leaving only the memory of what was lost in the dark. The boy lies still, a pale and bloodied figure in the deep, dark night. She sits in the chair, her face a mask of grief that never quite ends. The flashlight turns, its beam sweeping across the empty, cold, and silent forest floor. The boy lies there, his eyes open, staring at the canopy of dark trees. The forest is empty, the final, tragic act concluded in the deep, dark night. A single light flickers in the distance, a small, dying star in the dark. The body lies in the leaves, a quiet, final, and eternal, silent, dark end. She holds the boy, her arms around him in the cold, wet, dark earth. The pool is calm, the surface reflecting the darkness of the long, silent night. They drift together, a final, dark, and silent union in the deep, cold water.